The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you, Kristina?
I am well, Fred. How are you?
I'm doing great. Well, here we are. We're going to kick off our new podcast series based on the Executive and the Mystic. But before we get into any specifics there, I think it's important that we introduce ourselves to whoever may be listening or watching this. So my name is Fred LeFranc. I come from a consulting company called Results Strategy that's primarily focused on the hospitality space. And then I'm going to let Kristina introduce herself.
I am Kristina Wiltsee. I work as a life alchemist, which is a fancy term for I work with people to look at their personal development and how they can show up better as people within their own lives, for themselves, for their family, for their businesses, for anything along those lines. And to look at the kind of greater patterns that exist in the world and how we can pull those into a practical application within our lives.
Well, and so if you can see the juxtaposition we have here, it's interesting, and that's kind of why we decided to do this. I've been working with Kristina for a few years, and we've had a lot of deep conversations. And in my practice, I work with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs and board of directors, anyone in a leadership position. And after a while, I began to see certain patterns. Everyone's unique, so I don't want to put them in a box. But at times I find leaders that were insecure or not sure what to do next would be paralyzed by that, the circumstance they find themselves in, or to be blindsided. And then it would evoke certain things. And a lot of the time that I've spent working with companies, while there are processes that I put the company through, invariably I have to make sure that that leader also goes through some process to make sure they understand what it is that is triggering them to be in a state of paralysis or to take the wrong action. Sometimes I see leaders that make fear-based decisions, and they'll take a step that they feel is safe, but it really isn't safe. It actually makes the situation worse. So as an opportunity to maybe provide leaders with tools, we decided to join forces and create this podcast called Executive the Mystic. I represent the executive. Kristina represents the mystic. Though we both sort of have an overlap on both things. She's been an executive in companies and so forth and so on. And she's also a trained scientist, which always blows my mind away. She gets all that stuff about chemistry and things that I don't, but it's intriguing nevertheless. And so that's what we're here to talk about. And we've decided to give it a framework. And the framework is, essentially the ABCs: alignment, balance, and coherence. And what we're really trying to do is to help you have a system, a process, tools, questions that you need to ask and answer. And we're going to pose those questions to you. We're not pretending to have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers, especially in today's world. But we are able to pose the kind of questions that one might consider that in the process of asking that question gives you a different perspective. And that's what Kristina brings to the party, is that different perspective. That's what she's done for me, to see things in a very different way and to also discover the unbelievable, innate, intrinsic wisdom inside us as human beings. And so while one may go to school to get an MBA, and that's great for your mind, that doesn't help your heart. It doesn't help your gut. It doesn't help your whole person. And on top of leadership is generally not done by itself in the dark, okay? Leadership is when you have a group of people that are looking to you to help them get through some path, some difficulty, a challenge. And even if it isn't something that's an obstacle, it's just still a rallying cry to perform better. And that's what the series is going to focus on a great deal. So with that, let me have Kristina start off with the first A, which is alignment. So go ahead, Kristina.
Yeah, actually, can I just add really quickly as to why? I just realized something. Yeah. I think it's important. I just want to really emphasize too that with, one of the things that I feel is really practical about both Fred and I is that, it's all well and good to be like, oh, go and meditate every morning. Everything's going to be great, because then you'll all of a sudden be centered. Aren't we just so happy we're just centered for the day? And it's like, what we start to recognize is that, and this is why the ABCs are so important and why the framework that we've come up is so important, because both Fred and I are deeply practical in whatever it is that we're doing. We're wanting to give people information, but it's one thing to give people information. It's one thing to say, have courage. But if you don't actually understand how to do that on a practical level, if you don't actually understand what that means for you, and you're not able to evoke that in a time when you actually are facing significant fear, then it doesn't really mean anything, right? And I think that that's what a lot happens in, especially in the business world, is that we can get trained to be like, oh, this is the right way to do this, or this is the way that you're supposed to do this. And then you go and you actually try and take that into the business place, and you recognize that all your old patterns are still there. It's really great. You went to a 3-day seminar. Oh man, everything's changed. And then you start to say like, no. Wait. There's actually some really fundamental base principles that I'm basing my life on that are contrary to that 3-day seminar. And that is what's actually running my programming during the day when I'm a leader and when I'm at work. Not this, oh great, I was in a space where I was in group coherence. I was with people. We were all feeling so great about this thing, and I'm going to do all this. And then you lose it. And that's what we're addressing here, right? We're really trying to address what are the foundations that make it so that all of that business training that you have can actually be applied, and you can really integrate it into your daily life. And how can you make things that principles and different concepts that you may understand on an intellectual level, how are you making that actual behavioral changes within yourself? And recognizing that in many ways, you have to kind of clear the path of old behaviors in order to create the behaviors that you want. There's a lot about, discipline. I'm going to get up at 5 every morning. I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. That's one thing. But if there are underlying beliefs that are actually, you can get up at 5 a.m. every morning you want, but if you fundamentally don't have the right principles that we see in alignment, or you're not doing, the practices that are necessary to be able to get you to stay in that space, or you don't have coherence, which is what our ABCs are, then you're going to do something and it is not going to stick. And we're all about how do we fundamentally change the nature of our leaders in business, so that we can actually see the difference and it sticks and it becomes a lifelong change. And it doesn't just apply to business, it applies everywhere all over your life.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for sharing that. I think what it reminded me of is that you can adopt any practice you want, like getting up at 5 a.m. and all the things you read about that are going to make you successful. And those things are fine in and of themselves, but those are practices. The underlying principles is really where it's at. What are you trying to achieve by that practice? And some practices just don't work for you. If you don't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you want to go do something differently, great. You don't have to follow what Jeff Bezos does. Jeff Bezos does what works for Jeff Bezos, right? It doesn't have to work for you. But if you want to find out what it is for you, we want to address the principles behind those practices. So that's what you focus on. Those are the alignment to higher principles, higher things of order. And then you determine what's the best practice for you. We can't determine that for you. You have to figure that out. However you organize your day, however you prioritize your life, whatever is important to you or valuable to you, you have to determine that. But we're going to raise the issue of that it's something you must at least do. Consider this, and then go from that standpoint. So that was very good, Kristina.
Yeah.
So I'll let you go ahead and then talk about the first principle of alignment.
The first principle of alignment, indeed. All right. So alignment is all about how are you aligning with the most universal principles that you can. All right. And we mean that. And this is something that I work with people a lot about. This is actually fundamental to a lot of the personal development work that I do, is I recognize and have worked with people enough to recognize that people have strategies, beliefs, and principles. If you've done any personal development work, you may hear them as limiting beliefs or something along those lines. That are the fundamental principles that people are basing their life on. And they are running the show. They are sitting in our subconscious. Whenever we try and create a behavior that says, oh, well, I deserve to be wealthy, so I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. morning and then do this thing. If there is a fundamental principle that is sitting in your subconscious that's saying, well, I'm not worthy of having money, or I'm going to be corrupt if I have money, or anything like that, you're never going to be able to change any of the behaviors, because you basically have a force that is working against you, right? You have a force that you are not aware of, that is actually going to be sabotaging everything that you're doing. And so aligning with the highest principles makes it so that we are starting at the very, very base of this structure. And we are making the most solid foundation that we can. The way that I think of it is I compare it to the human body. The principles are the skeletal structure. It's a skeletal structure. And as we all know, we think of the skeletal structure as a kind of unchanging thing once we're fully grown. But we also know that that system is something that is going to constantly be tested. It needs to be tested in order to maintain the health of a human, right? It needs to be used. It needs to be, but fundamentally, once you get the right bones in place and once everything's in its right place, you can kind of keep those principles for a long time. We talk a lot in particular about Fred and I have a couple of favorite universal principles that we do in our work together as examples by universal principles. Things like the universe is neutral. Things like as above, so below, which is an alchemical one called the law of correspondence, which effectively talks to the fractal nature of the universe. There are other ones that are like, oh, the universe is love, which is kind of an alternative to the universe is neutral. Those are examples of universal principle, which we'll get into in a minute. But also as opposed to my principle is that vendors are always going to be corrupt and therefore I can never trust them. People have that as a principle in their life, right? That they've been handed that down. Or I am supposed to always be alone. I'm meant to always, it's safer in life if I am alone, right? These are common ones that we hear all the time. I'm not meant to feel emotions because I cannot be sensitive. If I'm sensitive or if I cry in public, then that is a huge problem. And so therefore I am only ever going to be grossly logical things. These are ones that I hear all the time, right? I have to be macho. I have to always be in control. I have to always know what everything's going to happen, right? Everything has to be orderly or else or else it's all going to go wrong. These are non-fundamental principles that people base their lives on.
Kristina, as you're saying that, I'm thinking that I'm struck by a lot of what you were expressing, which I hear as well, is those are more beliefs that actually are in opposition to principles. That's when you get into trouble. Because the principles of correspondence, the principles of vibration, that there's energy out there. And as a leader, you know that your persona is what electrifies your group, your audience, your culture. That's vibration. That's vibes, as like to say when you're in an experience, in an environment. But some of those self-limiting beliefs that you described so well are exactly what one finds. And it's about peeling back the layers. And we don't get into a lot of psychology. Oh, gee, why do you believe that? What happened to you? What happened to your kid? If you have that need, please go to a therapist. But I think what we're focusing on is right action. It's a very, kind of a Japanese concept. So just take the right action. Start focusing on the behaviors that will work for you and see what it does. And eventually those beliefs that are no longer valid and might have been valid for a different reason fall away. And there's pain in change. I want to be very honest about this.
Yes.
Everything we're talking about will create some form of pain, in the sense that you're just changing. It's just like a good workout. Your muscles are sore. That's pain. It's not bad pain. Someone's not batting you in the head with a 2x4. That's severe pain. But part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that your self-limiting beliefs don't create suffering. So when Kristina talks about the universe is neutral, which I've spent a lot of time focusing on that because I necessarily didn't practice all of that, is that when things occur, it's just something it's an event. It just occurs. And the Stoics have always been very good about saying it's not what happens, it's what you do about it that really creates your world. And I'll let Kristina give her Hamlet quote. I don't want to steal her thunder in that regard. But it's the understanding that as things unfold, and if we are present observing it, and if we are aligned with the right kind of principles, all the things that are happening in our lives that are trying to work for us, not against us, will lead us to what we want as a desired outcome. So we will talk more about the importance of having a good vision of oneself, a vision for your company, so forth and so on. But these are the practical building blocks in terms of how do you begin to get movement and clarity around what you're trying to do.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. So that's A. That's A.
This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands, navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance.
Shall we go on to B?
We should go on to B. Balance.
Balance. Balance is, if we think of a principle as something that once we get into place, it can stay there forever. It's like our skeleton structure, right? We recognize that balance is a lot like a muscle in the sense that you're always having to use it. You're always having to strengthen it all the time, right? And it requires a bit more maintenance. Balance does. This is the analogy that I use because I feel that these are the practices. This is like the getting up at 5 a.m. and what is it that you're practicing, right? Like what are you able to come back to, knowing that the world is full of fear and change all the time. It's always coming into our system. It's always buffeting us. We're always on this tightrope, trying to kind of walk our way across the tightrope, knowing that the winds are going to come up and try and knock us over. How we react to those winds is balance, right? It's how long is the more we do practices that make it so that we have a really solid foundation for the principles, that we're actually like enacting those principles are just, words in our head. And then we're like, these are the balance practices that I'm doing that back that up, right? We're making our balancing stick, right? Longer and longer and longer, right? So that we have more ability to handle the buffet and the winds of change that come into our life, right? That we're able to quickly come out of, it's like I say a lot with people is, when you have a reaction to something, everyone's going to have a reaction to something. But the more you balance, the more you're able to change its frequency, its duration, and its intensity, right? And that's the true mark of change, right? That's the true mark that you're improving or that something is shifting in you is that your reactions are not as strong. They're not, they're not as intense. They don't last as long. Maybe they don't happen as often. Right. And you're able to kind of get into that space. And the more that you practice balance, the more that you're able to balance faster, more frequently you're able to stay in that space. And Fred, I love your perspective on balance. What is your input on balance?
Well, I think one of the things that we see in business and in life is that there's a lot of paradox. Mm-hmm. And paradoxes are things that are what appear to be on the surface, two opposing ideas and forces. And as a leader, you're sort of in the middle of that, trying to figure out, well, which way am I going to go? And that's where the balance comes in. There are business goals and objectives and numerics around that you have to achieve. Increasing sales, reducing costs, improve labor, whatever your capital investments are. And there's a lot of activities around that. And then there's the value and quality of the services and product you're trying to create and offer to the public, to your consumer, to your end customer. And they seem to be in opposition because you want a great quality product, or you want to have great costs, right? Do you want to have phenomenal service? You want to have great labor. And the paradox that exists there is where a leader has to step in. And this is the genius of a leader, where the courage of a leader to sit there and say, wait a minute, I'm going to start. It's like being on one of those boards where you got this tube underneath you and you're on a board trying to sort of rock it back and forth and find that balance, or riding a bicycle. Boy, that's balance, right? And we all know what it was like the first time we had to ride a bicycle. I ended up in like a rose bush full of thorns, so I was bleeding everywhere. And that's life. That's what it does to you. There you go. You're falling off. And I joke about it with people saying, I see a lot of people running alongside their bicycle because they won't take the time to learn how to do it, convinced that they will then go beyond their means to do it, limitations of just walking or running. And that's how balance comes out too. It's important to learn that. And any leader who's in a C-suite already knows this paradox that exists, these opposing forces, and then trying to find their way through it. Some people unfortunately cheat, and eventually it catches up with them. They try and say, well, I can kind of do this one, but play games here. And you don't do that. It is trying to make sure you find an optimization of what would be found in a business system. And I look at businesses very holistically. I recognize when you pull down on one end of business, another part of the business moves as well. And sometimes that correspondence is not as easily visible. There's a great book called The Fifth Discipline that explains how systems and timing of decisions and actions and behaviors will go out there into the world. So sometimes leaders find the opposite of what they want existing in their company. They said, I thought I told you to want this, but that's the opposite. And that's because you fail to recognize the holistic nature of it. And also that every element seeks balance and clarity about what that is. And so the paradox is to recognize that you cannot have hot without cold, because one allows you to have the measure of the other. You can't have up without down. And this is a universal principle. This duality exists And the duality, while at the surface it may appear to be a struggle, what it is an embracement of both as being necessary. As human beings, what I've learned with Kristina is that we may have light, we also have shadow.
Hmm.
And you can't exist in a world that says, "Oh, I'll only focus on the light and the hell with the shadow. I'm going to put it aside because it's a
Hmm.
part of me that I don't like." No, you've got to embrace both because both are necessary. And at least what I've discovered is that both sides of oneself are striving and working for your benefit. They just do it in a very different way.
Hmm.
It's that understanding of it, of what it is that is within me that I'm trying to balance as an individual, and then how do I exert that externally in my business to create the balance of paradox within my organization.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And so you can see here, I take the personal perspective. Fred takes it to the business perspective, right? And also personal and both, vice versa. I think that's incredibly well said, Fred. Thank you. And so finally, coherence. Coherence is the energy with which we take all of the principles and all the balance that we've acquired and we move forward with courage and conviction. Or as I will not steal the thunder of Fred's quote, if you want to give that quote of your favorite. Go ahead, Fred.
Well, I've always read that courage is not the absence of fear; it's the ability to carry on in spite of it.
Mm,
And what we talk about in leadership is that, and especially in coherence, when you do A, you do B, and now you're in C, and now you're trying to really understand what's important to what your values are, and you're clear about that. And then you look at what is it that you're planning to do, what are you trying to achieve, and you have certainty around that. You have to have certainty. And of course, there's an old saying that says you may be certain, but you may not be right. So there's always that risk there that what
mm,
you're certain about is not going to play out. But you have to at least have that conviction to say, no, I've thought it through. Okay. I'm certain that I've considered all the factors that go into it. I've shared with my team. The team shared their feedback back to me. I've listened. Leaders speak last, so let them speak first about what their thoughts are. You take that all into consideration. You have a conviction around a certain set of ideas. You have a combination and a commitment of values and how you're going to behave as a team moving forward, and then you have the courage to move forward. And courage is really moving forward in a time of uncertainty, and we live right now in one of the biggest times of uncertainty that has ever existed,
yeah.
at least in my lifetime. This may not be, the Cuban Missile Crisis, but there's a lot of crises going on in the world right now. It's really in an uproar. There's a lot of dynamic change. And my title in business is chaos strategist. So we're going through chaos. And it's in
Yes.
the midst of that chaos that if you can see a path through it, at least one to the best design that you can give it, you can begin to move forward with that. And the beautiful thing about that is if you have a team behind you that is sharing the values and the vision of what you're trying to accomplish, and they're consciously and intentionally taking action, they'll figure it out. My metaphor for life is a lot like sailing. You cannot sail in a straight line because you can't control the currents, you can't control the winds. All you can control is your sail and your rudder, and that's what you have to adjust, and that's what it's about. And sometimes the seas are stormy. Squalls come out from nowhere, things that come from left field, and that's really what it's all about. And I think one of the pieces of this is that the team and the individuals start developing resilience. And resilience is how one behaves during times of uncertainty. But the way that occurs is when there's a center, and this is a
Mm,
coherence.
that's
There's a
yeah.
center inside yourself that says, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know what I'm intending. I know where I'm going to, and I'm going to do the best that I can. And I will adapt and adjust to the changing currents, to the changing winds and tack. Am I changing direction? Of course I am, but I'm not changing my bearing. I'm not changing where I'm heading to. And that's what coherence allows you to do. But it's an inside out job. You bring it to yourself as a leader, you bring it to your culture, and then you move forward as an organization.
Yes, that's wonderful. And so from to really expand on coherence from a personal development perspective, right? I think that coherence is an actual body state, right? Is that we recognize that there is a level of, whether it's meditation or whatever you want to say to kind of get you into that state. It is literally a state in which you have the proper governance within your physiology, right? So your heart is effectively meant to be the governor of your body. And this is not any sappy, like, oh, everyone's heart's meant to lead. It's like, yes, you can say that, but it is the actual practical reality that the electromagnetic field that your heart creates is actually going to create coherence in the rest of your body. It's going to organize your brain. It's going to make it so that all your nervous system is talking to each other, so that you're not sitting in a stress response, so that you're not sitting outside of your prefrontal cortex, right? You're actually utilizing your entire brain. Your gut is then going to be aligned with you as well. As we all know, the gut is what informs the brain. And so we actually recognize that the brain is actually the third brain, if you think of it. Heart, I would say heart first, gut second, brain third. And so when we talk about coherence, there's a very visceral human physical experience of coherence that we're talking about too. So there's this aspect of how you bring it into business, and then there's this aspect of what does it actually feel like in your body to be coherent. You are looking to create a system that says, again, if you want to use the analogy, well, what does it mean to be a heart-led person? It's like, it doesn't mean that you're soft. It doesn't mean that you're, it doesn't mean that you're doing things that are just like, oh, I'm just going to do things based on love and everyone's, I'm supposed to save everybody and rescue everybody. No. We're not talking about that at all. We are talking about a system that recognizes that there is actually a hierarchy within your body of how the system is supposed to talk to each other and how it's supposed to operate. And fundamentally, as a leader, the more that you can stay in coherence, that is a contagious state for your team. It makes it so that everyone can show up to a meeting in the middle of a stress. They may be your whole team may be having massive stress responses. And they're just saying, oh, this person's going into fight. This one's flight. This one's fawning. This one's doing whatever. You can come into that meeting and you can be like, guess what? I've done the work that makes it so that I'm aligned and I have balance to be able to deal with all of these things. And I am now coherent. I have a system in which my prefrontal cortex has turned on. The stress hasn't turned it off. And I am able to show up and I am able to lend to everybody in that room the practicality of my coherence. And then to make it so that everyone can make a rational decision, despite the fact that everyone's wanting to go into their individual stress responses, right? And so when we talk about coherence, there's more of a the experience of what that feels like in a visualization or in values or intentions, like Fred's talking about, and then there's the true practical reality of the fact that your system has a best, most optimal way to move forward and walk in everyday life. And the more that you can come back to that state of relaxation, that state of coherence, the more that you are actually able to lead consistently.
No, that's really, really well put. It reminds me of an orchestra. You ever heard an orchestra play, and the first couple of minutes are basically tuning their instruments, and they're all, it's a very discordant sound, right? Everything's going off in different directions. But the leader, if the leader is in a state of coherence, that the vibration of a leader, the energy of a leader, when it comes in, it brings order to disorder. And everyone all of a sudden gets tuned, and they understand what they're going to be playing. That's your plan. And it's done with different timing and tempo, and everyone does a different role, just like the notes they play are very different. But when it's all put together, it's beautiful. And Kristina mentioned something about if you talk in business about love, it sounds kind of crazy, but it really isn't, because we're not talking about nice leaders. Nice leaders are disasters. We're talking about kind leaders. Okay, a nice leader is seeking validation and approval of their subordinates. Like me because I'm a human being and stuff like that. And that's sort of a level of emotional intelligence or immaturity that one can deal with, and you can address that. Kind leaders are the kind that say, I love you, I care about you, I respect you, but I'm going to hold you accountable. You're getting paid to do a job, and I need this from you, and you said you're going to do it, so I'm going to make sure that you do. That's important to us. And in those cultures where leaders are kind, people know that I may be cared for, but I need to perform. I need to do that. And this, when you're going through these times of great change, oh my God, you need that more than ever before. And it doesn't mean that you're inconsiderate of someone's personal circumstances. Someone's going through a crisis, the illness of a child or death of a parent. Of course, you want to have empathy toward that within the limits of what the company can afford or what you can try and do. And I've done that with plenty of employees that have had cancer and these diseases or illness of a child. But at some point, you got to say, okay, if you aren't able to continue, then we will find a way to help you. But at the same time, in this, what we're trying to achieve, I need your help. This is why you're here. And that's a very important thing. And that's where a coherent leader can do that, because ultimately the courage is it has to be present in everyone's heart. I mean, that's where courage is. Courage is right here. Okay. And okay, I got it all figured out. My gut tells me this is the right thing to do. And now I have to go forward in the uncertainty, forward into the abyss, forward into no. It's like flying through the fog with no instruments. You know, that's dangerous. That's scary. But if you start developing sort of your own radar, your own sense of what's going on internally, and then your team shares it, all of a sudden there begins to be a little bit more clarity and pattern recognition of how to move through it.
Yes, I agree. And I think that that's such an important point, right? Is that we are all effectively always flying through the fog. And our bodies are we are able to tune our bodies to create instruments that we didn't even know existed, right?
Yeah.
That we've never even brought online because we were taught that whatever our mind can think up is the best thing. And then you start to recognize that no, there's actually so many systems, right? No matter how woo-woo you want, you can go all the way to the woo-woo, you can go all the way to the, very logical things. Our body is so amazing. Things as simple as excitement, right, is a gauge on this tool. This is some of the things that I really like to work with people, is to be like, okay, what are your actual tools? Because you have all these emotional systems, you have systems of coherence that you can get into. You have systems in which you're actually able to navigate that fog, that unknown, all the time with so many different tools, and yet we discount them because we can't think of them or we can't fathom them, right? And the more that we open ourselves up to developing that toolkit, which is what I feel like the ABCs is basically setting us up for, right? The ABCs in and of itself is a framework that we would like to offer that is a toolkit for how do you actually build a foundation of a solid leader from the ground up, right? From the ground up, even if you've already been a successful leader for years, how are you able to really make it so that you have an incredibly solid foundation, you have the agility to deal with change and paradox, and you're able to breathe and move forward in the middle of all of in the middle of all the chaos? How are you developing those tools and then expanding that tool set even further to make life this totally just amazing experience, right? Just magic, as I would call it.
That's so well put. I mean, I find leaders under stress who self-medicate. They may be drinking too much, not sleeping well. There may be some tension in their personal relationships because they bring home these business problems and they're not present with their family. It shows up in a lot of ways. I think people can recognize that. And our goal is to help someone just to recognize with no judgment. I mean, this is a classic, the universe is neutral. When I spend time with leaders and I ask certain questions and I look at certain things, and it's sometimes not pretty. They're embarrassed or they don't want to open up the kimono and see the garbage or the dirt. I said, I don't care. I really don't. I just want to know what truth is, And there's a great quote that says, truth is an accurate reflection of reality. So what is reality? Let's figure that out. Let's measure this together and see where it's at. And if, as an individual, if you're under incredible stress, let's talk about that as well. And that's really why I invited Kristina to join me on this, because she has the skill and the talent to help one understand how to do that in a very safe way. Again, with no judgment, only out of kindness and caring, to say, no, this is how you can start self-regulate. Begin to find the balance in yourself, really see where you're at, get the alignment to make sure that you're not fighting against the current. Don't swim against the current. Okay, it's like a riptide, you'll drown. And then in turn, get your whole company to be that way, and it makes a difference. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I think in life and in business, there's the have and the have-nots. And I'm not talking about the celebrities that are on Instagram trying to show they have a perfect life. That's just illusion. That doesn't make sense. Talk about in life, in business, especially people in business. Where there's a scorecard that's being, you're being held accountable to either by the public markets or the private markets or an investment group or whatever the case may be. And generally it's financial, and I get that, and that's important. There are other metrics that need to be put, as Kristina said, there's other things that need to be put in place. Because I like to measure culture. To me, culture is the secret weapon that helps organizations come through. And the two needed qualities are intelligence in an organization, as how smart the team is, as well as how healthy is the team, and that's the culture side. and we want to do both. But I'd rather start with the culture first, because a healthy culture will figure it out. They'll take care of each other. An unhealthy culture eat their young. And we want to provide you with an opportunity to learn what those things are so you can start seeing it in balance. We will explore this in future episodes in terms of, let's get into alignment deeper. Let's get into balance deeper. Let's get into coherence deeper. And then there's many practices that we can bring up. Kristina will bring up some practices for one as an individual. I will bring up practices that can be used in business that you can explore. And we'll both trade them off both ways because we have experience in both.
Yep.
And so, and we hope that this introduction to the ABCs during these uncertain times is of interest to you. We're going to have more episodes talking about it. We will encourage your feedback on it because we will listen to what it is you asked for. And we'll bring in some friends that are going through this, that might be willing to share some of their struggles and vulnerabilities around this. Because what you'll learn is vulnerability is an important quality in leadership. And it's not about being soft at all. Vulnerability is really, really hard. And we'll explain that in future episodes. So, Kristina, I want to thank you for joining me today to begin this process. This is exciting. And we hope that our audience will grow as people find interest in this.
Exactly. So if you would like to like and subscribe, and if you at all feel inspired to contact us, you're like, oh my gosh, one of the things that we love to do is we love to kind of have people come in too. If you are, even in this first episode, inspired, you can contact us at growth@theexecutiveandthemystic.com and just send us an email and be like, hey, I have an interesting thing going on. Do you think maybe you could help me out with the personal and the executive thing? Just want to put that out there, even here in our first episode. So that's
good. Yeah. And skeptics are welcome by all means.
Oh,
challenge
absolutely.
Whatever we're saying is fine.
We appreciate skeptics a lot.
That's right.
This is part of the balance.
Thank you very much, Kristina.
Thank you, Fred.
I look forward to our next episode and have a wonderful day.
Yes. Thank you.